If money affects your life in any way, Money Making Sense will talk about it. Be financially healthy, wealthy, and wise. Here's your host, Heather Kelly.
Welcome to Money Making Sense, the show that talks about all things money. Today we are at Sundance Film Festival, and I am joined by filmmaker Tadashi Nakamura. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Now you bring with you a documentary called Third Act, and this is very personal for you.
Yeah. So Third Act is a very intimate father and son story about me and my father, Robert A. Nakamura, who's known as the godfather of Asian American media. So the film is about his career, our filmmaking relationship as father and son team, as well as his current battle with Parkinson.
Yeah, so I did want to know, first off, this is just curiosity, because in the film you said you took your dad's acting class.
Documentary production class.
Yeah, just so you could get an A. So yeah. I want to know, did he actually give you an A?
I did. I got the easy A, so mission accomplished. I think, for me, I'd always kind of struggled in the classroom, and so when I was at UCLA, I discovered ethnic studies and Asian American studies, which, because the curriculum was very relevant to my own life and what I was interested in, I started doing better. But my dad was also an Asian American studies professor at the time too, so he taught an undergrad documentary production course and needed a GPA booster, so enrolled in his class.
So in the film you mentioned, and also we saw, that your father opened up about a lot of things that you didn't know about in his past. Why do you think he opened up during the filmmaking?
I think there's multiple levels. I think one is one of the symptoms. His symptoms of Parkinson's was depression, and so I think in very depressed states he would kind of look back at his career and maybe look back at his life, and I think at a depressed state he was able to articulate it where usually he might just hold it in. I think another reason why is, my dad has been my mentor, and he's one of the, a dad that would do anything for me. And so as my mentor, as a filmmaker, he, like in the beginning of the film, he says, he wants to do this film to help my career. And I think he wasn't lying. So I think he really pushed himself to be more vulnerable. One, as a filmmaker, because he knows, the deeper and more vulnerable a subject can be in the film, the better the film will be. But at the same time, I think he really wanted this film to be good for my benefit, and I think that really pushed him out of his comfort zone.
Yeah, I can't speak to the Parkinson's about how that may have affected his willingness to speak up, but I saw him opening up because he's like, oh, this is film. And because he knows film, to me, that was the impetus for him to be like, okay, I got to tell him everything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's the unique relationship of us. I'm second generation filmmaker. He's the filmmaker. So for him to be a subject now instead of behind the camera, it was a little bit different. But at the same time, he knows what is a good interview. He knows what is a good character, and really kind of try to go deeper than surface level.
Right. And how do you think his depression affected his career? Because I think somewhere along the way you said when you were younger, you would notice that he would disappear in his room for weeks at a time. You just didn't know that was depression.
Yeah, I think I think mental health in general, there's a lot more awareness now, and I think, especially as a kid, honestly I don't even know if my dad would have even articulated it as depression, but now that we, he's been clinically diagnosed, things like that. I think it is something that, especially from my dad is very proud, very would probably would kind of want to hide that from me or anyone, any kind of weakness. So I think there was a time when, I think a lot of people deal with different levels of mental health that either they don't know themselves or they just learn to cope. But I think for my dad, filmmaking was a way of processing that trauma that, as a kid he was incarcerated in a concentration camp during World War II, lifetime of racism. The films really allowed him to kind of process that for himself, and I think was a source of, if not healing, at least a way to deal with it throughout his life.
So you think the depression didn't affect his career too much, or were there times when he had to stop working on something that you're aware of?
Not to where it probably didn't stop. It didn't stop him. I think if anything, it probably would have been a lot worse if he didn't have a creative outlet. It didn't have a voice. Didn't have kind of a language to articulate. So I think a lot of people, like my dad, may not be able to articulate his emotions through words, but I think through his films and through his photography, he was able to do that.
Do you think you used your camera in this documentary as armor against what was happening with your dad? For
sure. I mean, I think there in the beginning when he finally got diagnosed with Parkinson's, I think that was really scary for me. Didn't really know what the future held. And so I definitely escaped into the film, definitely used the camera as this armor, and even it was easier for me emotionally to see my dad and even to see myself as characters in a film that I'm making versus real life. And I think I was able to ask those harder questions, almost approaching it as two characters talking versus me talking to my dad. But then I think it also evolved later when we got in a rhythm and those conversations became really special, intimate conversations that, most kids don't have opportunities to talk to either parent about. And at that point, I actually began to cling to those conversations and felt like the longer I could keep this film going, the longer I could have that, unique team professional connection with my dad.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost both my parents last year,
so I'm sorry.
This one resonated with me. And so hearing you talk about having that time to have that conversation, I kind of miss that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And I didn't have that from either of my parents. So
yeah.
When you started the documentary, you didn't know about his diagnosis. So what was your original intent?
Well, the original intent, so when my dad was my age, he made a film on his dad, which is my Ji-chan. And I think that was such a gift to me as his grandkid, because it gave, I was able to hear what my Ji-chan sounded like, looked like as a younger man. I only knew him as a very, older man. And so I always kind of wanted to do that for my dad and kind of capture who he is. So it was something I always wanted to do, and honestly, I probably felt like I wasn't ready. I knew this was probably going to be the most important film I ever made, and felt like I needed to have the skill level as a filmmaker to do it correctly. But it wasn't until now that we now know that it was early signs of Parkinson's. At that time, he was just slowing down cognitively. He wasn't as sharp, and that's when I kind of realized that it's kind of now or never. He is already slowing down, and that really kind of pushed me to start it.
The important thing for me in this film is bringing more awareness about the internment or concentration camps that we had here in the U.S. during World War II, because there's a generation that's probably never even heard about it.
Yeah, I think there's never enough films about the Japanese American World War II experience, but there has been a good amount of films made already. I think they need to be more accessible to the general public. But one thing we wanted to do was maybe what can we bring to the table that those films have not. And then my dad, who's spent his whole career making films about camp, he himself said that his work included, he doesn't feel like there's been anything, book or film, that captured just truly what it felt like and how it kind of really destroys your own identity, and even destroys the way you see your own family, yourself, and the world. And so that's something we wanted to do, not only educate people about the camps happen, but how deep, multi-generational, the trauma, continues to reverberate in the community.
Do you know if your grandfather ever went back to the house he used to live in and dig up the stuff he buried? Did he ever find it?
No, I think that was, at least a lot of that stuff is gone. So I think for me, there aren't that many family albums, from my grandparents. They just don't exist anymore.
So have you been able to get distribution yet for third act?
Yeah, so we are slated for a PBS broadcast on Independent Lens. So ITVS was one of the partners in making the film, and they've been super supportive. So we're excited about that.
That is good. And you said you've been to other festivals in Sundance several years before. What other films have you brought here or been involved with?
So the first time I came to Sundance was in 2002, and that was my dad's film. So that was the last film that he directed. It was a short film, and then one of my first films, short film that I made, premiered at Sundance in 2008. So it's kind of a good full circle moment to come back here with this film. And then the most recent trip before this was 2 years ago, 2023. I was a Sundance Asian American Fellow and got to come with the fellowship.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. Is there anything else about the film or your father that you want the audience to know about?
I think, I hope the film helps, at least give people a glimpse of what my dad did and his impact in the Asian American film community and also the documentary community. But I think more importantly, I want people to really walk away with the understanding and hopefully could potentially connect with, or that could resonate and sound familiar, is, how these historical traumas like the Japanese American World War II concentration camps, they really affect all aspects of your life, and it's not something you could ever get over. There is no cure, and just like Parkinson's, there's no cure, but at least trying to use my dad as an example of him, he had film and the arts, at least there's a way to process that, to build community through that process, and hopefully if you can't be cured, at least do as much healing with others as you can.
Well, thank you so much, Tadashi Nakamura. Again, you're here at Sundance with the film Third Act, but it sounds like we're going to be able to watch that on PBS if people can't get to it at Sundance Film Festival this year or watching online. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. You can email me with any questions or topics you want to hear about at hkelly@ksl.com. That's HKELLY@ksl.com. And because this is Money Making Sense, you can subscribe for free on Spotify, Overcast, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, and you'll never miss another episode.
Thanks for being a Money Making Sense listener. Follow your common sense on social media. Money Making Sense on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.